Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, and I'm moderating the first Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel session. So through Fathers for Pixels, the Pixel Project is providing a platform and learning resource for dads across the world to step up to speak out about the importance of combating violence against women, sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity. So for this year's inaugural series, we are collaborating with Men Challenging and Fathering Together, two organizations comprising men who are working towards a more equitable and violence-free world for women and girls by actively addressing sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity among their male peers. This June's Fathers for Pixels campaign features 12 fathers from Asia, Europe, and North America. Each live stream YouTube session will feature 3 fathers discussing a topic that links fatherhood and how dads can help stop violence against women in their families, communities, and cultures. Each session will also include a live moderated Q&A segment for dads and communities to ask questions. So today's YouTube session is a very special one because it is our first ever Fathers for Pixels panel session. And what better topic to start things off than walking the walk, a better self, a better dad, because change starts with the individual. So I'm going to put our dads on screen and introduce you to them. So here to take part in the discussion are the 3 men who are feminist allies who have spent years working in one capacity or another to eradicate violence against women and to advocate for more positive masculinity and a more gender equitable world. First up is Brian Anderson. Brian is the co-founder of Fathering Together, a global initiative to bring fathers together through storytelling, educational opportunities, and community. So prior to Fathering Together, Brian worked with college men to understand masculine privilege and devise strategies to be allies for women and girls. As the proud father of 2 spirited daughters, whom you all might see a little later on if they make a guest appearance, he works towards a bright future for them, free of violence and filled with opportunity. Next up is Grae Davis. Evan is the husband of Jennifer and the father of Jared and Ashton. He's an adventurer, activist, speaker, documentary maker, and the director of It's a Girl movie about female gendercide and infanticide in India and China, and he's a human rights advocate. His passion is to create and equip others to create strategic media communication tools that impact culture through storytelling methods that engage the heart. Having encountered the scope of violence against women throughout the world in his travels, he sees advocating for equality and justice for women as a key priority. And please welcome Mike Duncan. Mike is the co-founder of the Native Dads Network. He's the founder and CEO, Mike. He's the founder and CEO of the Native Dads Network. He's an enrolled member of Round Valley Indian tribes. His tribal heritage is, and correct me if I get the pronunciation incorrect, is Concow, Wailaki, Winton, and Western Bend Shoshone. Mike facilitates the Fatherhood is Sacred curriculum that has been completed by 200 parents and families, helping create a network of fatherhood groups in Northern California. He works with urban and rural Native communities, conducting workshops on historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, healthy relationships, and family violence and abuse. And you, the audience, will also be able to ask them questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen, and Denisha Rajendran, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Brian, Evan, and Mike to answer. So now onwards to the panel session. So just to lay the groundwork, I'm sure everyone will probably agree that a father is usually the first male role model in a person's life, and dads do have a significant impact on their son's attitude towards women and girls and their daughter's view of what constitutes a healthy relationship with the male people in their lives. In order to be an excellent male role model and to raise the next generation to be less sexist and misogynist, as well as to usher in a better world for women and girls, dads need to set a good example, not just with their words, but with their actions. To do this effectively, they need to start with themselves, as we all do. Improvement always begins with ourselves. To work on being a non-sexist, non-misogynist, and non-violent man who treats women and girls and other marginalized peoples with respect. So with that in mind, the most obvious question to start this discussion is, well, why should men do serious self-examination on themselves and their behavior in society towards women and girls? So let's start with Mike.
I knew you were gonna pick me. I think it's I'll just start from I gotta start from the beginning. I think I'll just keep my answer kind of short, but I have to start with this. I think one of the things, I can only speak from our perspective. What I mean is that the tribal community and what I see sometimes. Again, we have to factor in a thing about colonization for us. We look at traditional healing as a traditional people and traditional teachings. A lot of our communities were matriarchal societies. And so, again, our women were leaders in our community. Women were the decision makers in our community. And the men, with together as a unit, we came to a decision was best for the community. Well, a lot of things have changed since that time. And so we have to factor in the fact that, we look at colonization, assimilation, boarding schools in communities. And then we start to understand why things are the way they are today. If you're just speaking for a male, as me personally, as a male, and the way that I was raised with some of the teachings, we talk about misogyny. And that's something that I've just learned probably in the last few years. Or mansplaining. I learned that in the last couple of years as well. Society teaches it. Movies, music. And I'm just speaking from my perspective, from where I'm from. I know different places and different, around the world, they have different belief systems go back thousands of years of male dominance. We could even look at, how churches. Teach that as well. Where sometimes we say God, we say He. Well, in our old teachings, our belief system, long time ago, before there was a colonization, it was creator of all things. See, God, creator, was bigger than just a he or a she or a person. So it was a spirit. It was something stronger and bigger. And so it started with a mindset. It goes back. If you want to really dig deep back into it, we want to look at misogyny, where this comes from. We have to start from the beginning, but where these things were created through colonization and a belief system. Where does that come from, right? And so all our people at one time were tribal people. It doesn't matter where you're from, what continent, we were tribal people, and the same thing that happened to us happened to your people at some point, and this belief system was installed into our communities. And so I don't hope that answers a little bit of your question. I don't want to hog up all the time because I can go on and on and on. But I would say that that's a part of where we look at for our people here. That is something where we start at is the beginning of the traditional teachings and where it was lost at.
So you mentioned Christianity. So I think we can naturally segue to Evan, because Evan has, I think, a background that has some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree with what Mike says. And we all come from a culture. I mean, we have cultures that come from the ethnic group we're in. We have cultures that come out of the societal, influences, entertainment culture, family culture, and all of those are, the customs, the social ideologies, value systems, and all that we grow up with. In my particular case, I grew up in a pretty conservative Christian culture that was very patriarchal, and certainly not I never observed any violence against women. My father only loved and cared for my mother my entire life, but there were a lot of subtle, subtle ideologies towards the roles, gender roles, like the ingrained cultural values that kind of signaled that women were the weaker sex, required protection, active leadership of men. Women were kind of expected to submit to men in all things. They were prohibited against, they weren't really, women weren't prohibited against higher education and careers, but girls were encouraged to see their highest calling to be wives and mothers, while men were kind of the ones who expected to be, to have the careers, to be the providers. Women were prohibited from having roles in leadership in the church. They were prohibited from being in any positions of authority over men. And this was throughout most of my childhood. As a young adult, we transitioned into churches that were, much less, conservative in those particular mindsets. But, from an early child, I had these values embedded in, subtly, subconsciously in how I saw women, my expectations of gender roles, all of those kinds of things. So to answer your question, I think, if we as men aren't aware of where we're coming from, the influences we've had throughout our childhood, throughout our life, and how those things impact the way we view those around us, in this case, women, it impacts obviously our wives, our daughters, but on a larger scale, our entire community. And I think it's really important that we're aware and constantly asking ourselves that question, how are my attitudes and mindsets towards women or towards anyone else, are they correct? Are they destructive in any way?
So Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think just going back to something you said, Mike, around the decision-making process and how as communities we need to live and work together. And I think when I read that, my initial response was like, if we're not doing that internal work of reflecting on where we sit in our communities, what we have to contribute to our communities, I think there's such a lack of awareness that these are the skills that I have that I can bring. And if we don't do that internal work, then we're not bringing our full selves to a community. And I think, and to Evan's point, like I come from a Catholic background, and like being forced into a role as a man may not be what I want to be, right? Like I work with a lot of fathers that want to be a stay-at-home dad and want to be more maternal, quote unquote, in their relationships to their children, and to be forced into a role that is counter to that can be detrimental to their health and to their spouse or their partner's health. And so I think that as a piece of this that is almost internal violence to us as men to force ourselves into the roles that our society is also telling us to do.
It's almost like a straitjacket, I think, in certain ways, gender roles and what society, patriarchal society and mores and norms force everyone into. And we can see that with everyone. I think everyone suffers to a certain degree if you're not comfortable. Some people do fit into the binary the binary model that is currently the dominant model, but I think a good percentage of people don't. So we're talking now about, and you make a good point, Brian, because, women have been struggling against the rules and the restrictions that have been placed on us, what's feminine, what's not. And it's the same thing for men. Why can't they be stay-at-home dads? Why can't they go into careers where careers that are not deemed masculine? But moving on, so going from there, so here's the thing: when did you realize that you needed to confront your own ingrained sexism, misogyny, and/or toxic masculine behavior? When did the light bulb come on for you? I think let's go start with Mike again.
I think I think for me, let's see, let's go back, because I mean, when I was reading the questions, I thought about that. You know, there's a lot of things that you said. Like part of this doing this work is really starting with yourself first. You know what I mean? And then everything you teach comes from inward outward. And so for me, it was really at the beginning of when I started having children. And this is just my honest truth, because prior to that, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is so deep rooted, we don't even realize we're even doing it. Matter of fact, there are, and I'm not victim blaming or pointing the finger. There's a lot of times the women expect that masculinity to be given to them, and if you're not, then you're a weaker man. I just want to say that. But when I started realizing the things that I was doing, number one, I started teaching the course of Fatherhood and Motherhood is Sacred, which is a NAFA, which stands for Native American Fathers and Family Association program. It comes out of Arizona as well. But I started having daughters, and I started realizing. Somebody told me from the beginning, your daughter's going to marry somebody just like you. And that scared the crap out of me, right? And so I had to do some really soul searching. I'm the first encounter of a male figure to my daughter. Whatever she sees me doing to her is what she's going to allow my daughters, is what she's going to allow into her life, And so I started practicing, and I think through time, you started realizing it's deeper than just kind of like saying, hey, opening the door for them, or being being polite, pulling out their chair. It's deeper than that. It's the way that you talk to them. It's the way that she allows people to talk to them. You teach them, again, how a male should treat them or talk to them and treat them. And you started realizing, even with some of the things I was teaching, I was like, man, I haven't been perfect at that in my lifetime. And so maybe those some of the things I need to start changing. I need to practice what I preach, right? And so in time, and through this time, I've become better. So I got a lot of work to do. Of course I do. I'm human. I make mistakes. But I'm getting better at the fact that thinking of, again, what really truly understanding what misogyny is. Like I said, mansplaining, or even violence against women, and what that exactly means. What abuse means: emotional, mental, physical, spiritual abuse. Really truly understand what that means: emotional abuse. Criticizing, judging, putting down. Even female shaming. Like, oh, you do things like a girl, and then and laughing, and then you think that's funny because we were taught, like, hey, you did it to hey, why you swing like a girl, or why? But what does that do to a confidence to a young girl? Like, they're weak, right, mentally. So there's all these little things that you start to realize that, hey, that's not cool. That's not what we should be teaching. You know what I mean? And so it started from that point on, when I started having children, and just trying to be a better father.
Yeah, just to interject that women and feminists and girls nowadays have reclaimed that when we say we fight like a girl, we fight we're tough. Like, normally it gets accompanied with a picture of Wonder Woman or Supergirl, or our moms. You fight like a girl. Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So next, either Evan or Brian. Brian has 2 little girls.
Yeah.
So he's in a process that Mike was going through. So Brian, any perspectives on that? When you had your daughters, was that also when you realized you needed to confront your knee-jerk, ingrained sexism or behavior?
Yeah. Yes and no. I think it took it to a new level. When I was thinking of this, I was trying to think, like, when could have been the first most, like, and there's stages throughout my life that have like little flashbulb moments of realization, but definitely being, the father of 2 girls, just a whole new level of, like, when I'm at the playground and I see little boys treating my girls in a certain way, or dads of other kids treating my girls a different way. It just brought it so much. Okay. All right. 1 minute. I feel like they perfectly timed. Every time you ask me to speak, they come running into the side of the room. But I would say, like, the first real flashbulb moment for me was in high school. I did a lot of drama, theater, musicals, stuff like that, and so did my sister, and we're really close in age. And where I'm from, not a lot of boys would go out for these parts, and I'm by no means like a phenomenal singer, but I had enough talent out of the small amount of men that would step up that I would get like lead roles for the male characters. And my sister would always get put in the chorus, and she'd get looked over even though she was far better than some of the other women. And one day she just like broke down when we were driving home from practice and just laid into me about the privilege that I had in that space. And I didn't know how to handle it, right? I had never had, not that my dad didn't help raise me in a good way, but he had never given me a way to think about my privilege. And so I was just very dumbstruck. And all I knew to do was hold my sister's hand while she cried, because there was no way I could defend myself or the actions of our music director and things like that. But I think that was really where it dawned on me, like just how easy stuff was given to me in my youth. Like, and as I went off to college and to other spaces, I realized like, wow, I definitely, I was a big fish in a small pond in my hometown, and just realizing my sister is just tougher than I am because she had to fight so much more at a younger age to kind of get to where she wanted to be. But now as a father, I'm like, okay, how do I not be the chivalrous, like hold every door? Like, how do I still allow my daughters to thrive on their own and build their own independence? But then also, how do I like create those spaces for them and kind of be an advocate when they need me to? So, yeah.
So Evan, when was your light bulb moment?
I don't know that there was ever one really big flash light bulb moment, but subtly over time, I just started, recognizing little things. They were the obvious things at first. Like, I always loved to cook. And I was in high school. I was in home ec. I was the only guy in the class, and I wanted to go to a culinary institute, and I ended up going into the filmmaking instead. But my wife does not like to cook, but she never felt that was okay, because there were subtle signals amongst the community. All the other women in the community were the homemakers, the cooking, the cleaning, and she, I think there was just, no one ever outright said, but those subtle signals, they add up. It was one thing after another like that I'm starting to think. When I met my wife, Jennifer, she was very motivated. She was going to college. She had aspirations. She wanted a career, and she married into our family. She came from, her father had left her and her family when she was 11, and I think she was hungry for a strong family. We had a large family, very, got together a lot, very strong family culture, and I think she really wanted to be a part of that. She wanted to fit in, but there was a lot of ways you do that right and a lot of ways you do that wrong within that culture, and a lot of those were wrapped up in this. The religious ideologies about gender roles, and she really struggled with a lot of those, and I recognized that she was struggling with a lot of those, and started feeling more and more like this is these are not things that should matter that much. And I think that's probably where it started, and just increasingly pushing back against those little subtle expectations over time.
Yeah. So so let's dig a little deeper into that. What is or are the most difficult things about yourself that you've had to acknowledge when you started doing the work on getting rid of any ingrained sexism, misogyny, or toxic masculine behavior that's been normalized? Once you've realized all that, what was the most difficult thing about yourself that you had to acknowledge?
You want me to pick up on that?
Yeah, pick up on that. We'll go on the other. Yeah.
What Mike's not first again? Yeah, I mean, I think that starting to recognize that there's some wires that are crossed. I mean, when you grow up in a really strong culture like that, where there's a very strong sense of identity, there's a very strong sense of we've got this truth, we've got this way of doing life that's ultimately perfect in so many ways, and the rest of the world does it wrong. And we have this kind of corner on how to do family, how to have strong marriages, how to raise children right, and all of that. And you start seeing the holes in the formula. You start recognizing that there's some things here that aren't healthy. There's some codependence, and and some mindsets that I can see are it's doing harm, to other people, to my wife. Or I see my daughter. She's very, very strong person from the time she was born. I mean, she knows what she wants, and no one's going to tell her different. And within that family culture, she got a lot of, there was a lot of pressure for her to act like a woman. Just, there's certain ways girls behave, and you're not behaving, you're not fitting the bill. Just starting to see those signs, I think that was, those were the times. It's difficult to realize that, you're making mistakes that are harming your own daughter. You're practicing, as a father, and especially in that culture, again, the father was the one who was to protect and provide and make sure everyone was safe and strong. And I'm starting to realize that I'm actually doing harm in many ways with the things I believe that I thought were core aspects of truth, of all that's right. And that's hard sometimes when you're confronted with those things.
Yeah. Mike?
I think one of the things, I just really go back to, like I said, I want to go back to kind of the beginning of, or just even the thoughts. Because I replayed this even, because I come from a place of dysfunction at one time, recovering alcoholic, in a very bad place. This is where all this fatherhood things, because not really understanding, because the environment that I was in was very toxic. From a very young age, a teenager, I didn't play in the band. I didn't like hang out. I didn't have in the book club. I was in none of those things. I was partying. I was skipping school. I was around the wrong crowd. And there's a lot of behaviors that are, again, like I sort of just taught that I bought into. I'm not trying to point the finger or blame. But when I can just tell the difference. When now that I work with men, where you come, where did this come from? And I guess where I struggle at, or when I started realizing, I guess the difference of the dysfunction is because, like I said, things are so superseded within our communities. You know what I mean? It's like you said, television. You sexualize women, especially when you look at the indigenous cultures and how non-natives sexualize women, and how again I bought into that belief system. Or again, the thoughts of being abusive that you really don't even think they're abusive until you understand truly what abuse is. But when you start to change, or when you start to look at things and you start to develop the sense of the understanding what healthy is, it's very conflicting, because it gets to a place where you have to say, okay, look at yourself and you go, well, I feel bad for some of the things I've said, or even the way that I thought, or even the things that I've said out loud, the way that I behaved, this is coming from now a 49-year-old man going on 49, and I'm looking at life and saying, if I could take some things back, I probably would. If I knew what I knew now, what I knew then, maybe my story would have been a little different. But the place of healing, of really truly being honest with yourself, and looking at yourself. Now that I'm a father, I understand that my kids will be fathers one day. My kids will be mothers one day. I guess that was a place of me sitting, being honest with myself, saying, what am I exactly teaching them? Right? What am I exactly showing them that's going to make an impact for their children's children? And it's very strange, because when you start to talk that way, or the way that we're talking right now, because I've done these different men panels, and I will see comments on the side, and there'll be a lot of these women going, I've never heard a man talk the way you guys are talking. They'll say those comments. We're probably going to get some of those, and it makes me feel like there's not many men that really, I guess, maybe have the courage or have the knowledge, or really the want to change. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Or to see the value of changing. I guess that's a better way to put it. Because again, what they're doing now is working for them. So for me, it's like when you start waking up at the beginning and saying, when we start to discover, I guess for me, when I started discovering what truly healthy is and how I want to give that to my children, show them what healthy is, that's when I started to change. Now, like being honest, forgiveness, love, learn to make good choices, thinking before we speak. Those are all important things that we need to, practice for any human being, right? But, I don't know if I answered the question, but that's what I was thinking while I was talking. And I am just continuing to kind of grow as a human being right now. That's just the truth. I like when I do classes or I do groups or when I speak, do educate, group speaking or whatever. I just, I'm still a work in progress. And I think that's what I'm still discovering new things that I need to work on. And, and I'm trying to look at all sides and then check, incorporate that into my thought process and just try to be a better human being. So, and I know I have a lot of work. I have a long way to go. There's a lot of things I'm still discovering. You know what I mean? And when we start to work with individuals or men, we start to understand that this is, again, it's like we're coming from one place, but I understand this is the power of understanding, like where they're at. I try to understand where they're at. If you're talking about change, because like some men go, well, this woman did this. Well, what about, them? And they like to point the finger. But we all want, I don't care who you talk to, especially when we talk about men having children. We want all men want their kids to be better. They want them to have good lives. You know what I mean? And so it starts with the things that we say and the example we put forward, right? I never want to have my kids live the negative things that I lived, whatever that was, whether it's alcohol and drugs or whether it goes to the behavior, or the thinking. I want to change that, and I think that's where it becomes important when we start to say, well, this is what I want for the future. This is what I want to leave behind. This is what I want to give my kids, my grandkids, my grandkids, the ones I haven't even met yet. I want to set that foundation for them to have good lives.
Yeah. Ryan, so what was the most difficult thing you had to acknowledge about yourself?
Yeah. I don't want to go after Mike anymore because I love what he's saying. He's speaking such great truth, Mike. I love it. I think that the thing for me, and this isn't something that I could just like walk away from, right? It's always with me, especially being, like white man. Like there's just so many layers of privilege in what I carry with me. But I think what I find in myself when I hear in the communities I'm a part of with dads is just the sense of entitlement of like, for whatever reason, I get these things, right? Like you hear like these guys will talk about being an incel and being like involuntarily celibate, and it's just like
I'm trying not to roll my eyes at them right now.
Right. Well, and I try to have compassion and grace and say like, okay, where are you coming from that you think that you're entitled to this in the first place, and how do we work with you to kind of reframe your thinking, because it's probably something you're doing, right? And if you're not doing that internal work of recognizing this is the weight of my privilege that is having these ripples around me, you're not going to ever fully appreciate why people roll their eyes or why people get so frustrated. And I think for me, every day I have to like check myself when I get upset with my daughters, or I get upset with my wife, or if I'm at work and I realize I'm just taking up so much space because I think I'm just entitled to that. Or like I have to get my voice out there because like I have a great idea, and how much that's silencing those people around me because now we've run out of time, or I'm mansplaining or speaking over people. As much as I've done the work over the last 15, 20 years as an adult professional person, I still have coworkers that remind me like, hey, you're mansplaining, or hey, did you mean to throw your man card into the ring? And I'm just like, right, I did, didn't I? I did it again. And thankfully, I've cultivated relationships with women I work with that they know I'm working on this stuff. I know that I'm not perfect. And so there's a space where they can call me out on it in a somewhat polite but also realistic way, to kind of put me back in my place. But I think for me, that at the heart of it is, how are we constantly falling into this space of, as a man, I'm entitled to X, Y, and Z, and because of that, that puts you in a disadvantage or puts you as kind of second-class citizen. And I know, I mean, speaking just for myself, but you know, I would not have a healthy relationship with my wife. I would have really even more tantrums with my daughters and I'm speaking for both my daughters and myself with the tantrums, if I wasn't kind of recognizing that sense of entitlement or the gender imbalance of like who does what in the home, just because of virtue of our gender. And my wife will call me out on it quite often to be like, you know, like, I need you to do this. You've been slacking off, and and I come up with like 5 or 6 different rationalizations of like, oh, well, I have this going on. She's like, so do I. I'm like, right. And I'm like, well, how about this? Nope. So, you know, it's good to be put in check. And it's not so much an issue of like, I'm losing out or I'm like giving away or giving up things, right? It's more, again, kind of going back to your first question. It's about like, how are we a unit? How are we a community that we all work together to kind of move forward?
Yeah. So extending from that, what sort of obstacles did you face when you started to consciously work on your own sexism, misogyny, or toxic masculine behavior? And how do you deal with them? How do you overcome them? What were the obstacles, internal or external?
All right, Evan.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, ultimately, and I think ultimately we left the community. It wasn't solely because of the you know, the sexism that was inherent in the patriarchal culture. It was a lot of things that were ingrained in such a strong cultural identity surrounding such a strong religious ideology, and combined with a very strong family identity, that it was like a fishbowl. We were all living together on the same street. We had 5 houses on the same block. If you can start to understand kind of the degree to which we were, you know, locked into this community, and it was also locked into a lot of expectations, a lot of strong ideas and expectations about how our obligations to each other and to the community, and as a family, I recognize that, you know, my wife and I needed to establish our own way of living, you know, not only with the patriarchal stuff, but also so many other aspects of, you know, our marriage and family life, the way we raised our kids. There were some, you know, toxic ideologies about discipline, and that we just we're seeing some really, really bad signs in our kids, and we're like, we've got to, you know, and I mean, suffice it to say, I mean, there was so many things about being part of that community that were positive as well. A lot of support, a lot of very positive aspects. And you know, my parents grew up in environments that were, I think, even more extreme. They both came out of that with a lot of pre-programming that they weren't even aware in many ways that a lot of this was unhealthy. And then each of us kids were born and kind of inherited that. And really, as a family, we were all victims of some strong ideologies that were really unhealthy. And ultimately, we left the community. We separated from my family. We separated from the church, and we've since reconnected and have very, very great relationships now with the whole family. But I think we all had to take some space, to take some time, and just establish how do I want to live my life? How do my wife and I want to function as a marriage? How do we want to function as parents? How do we want to see gender roles? You know, my wife, she was a stay-at-home mom. You know, I think she valued being able to be home and raise our children, but as soon as our kids were old enough, she went back to college and she got her degree. She graduated cum laude, you know, 4.0 GPA, you know, top of her class, and so, you know, the the obstacles, were, do we stay in a community for the sake of being accepted, being able to remain a part of this community that we really know little else? I mean, we lost a lot of our Christian friends. We isolated from our family for a period of time, and there was a period where we were really, by ourselves in many ways. But now the full circle of that is everyone can come back together with a strong sense of respect of each other's choices, of how each individual, each family wants to live their lives, how I want to raise my daughter. And, I do not want her to grow up with those limiting beliefs.
So you actually accidentally answered a question from the audience too. So I'm going to put the question, I'm going to put it on, and it's from Anusha, and she says, it can be very difficult to go against such ingrained culture and live the way you think is right. So, and her question was, how do you deal with or teach family or people who insist that the status quo is correct? And you answered that question, Evan. So I'm gonna, and Mike and Brian, do you have any thoughts to add to Evans about the external obstacle of culture and people around you? Any thoughts to add to that?
I would just say, thinking back to, I lost some friends, some friends who didn't quite get it, didn't understand why I was being more active and speaking out and vocal in this, on this, but also in other interconnected areas of violence against people. And I remember saying to a friend, I was like, we have to fix it. And he's like, it's not that broken. And I, at the time, I was just thinking to myself, well, how broken does it need to be for you to want to fix things? Because if anyone is hurting because of a system or a culture that we're living within, it seems to not make sense that we would want to keep that. I mean, I think, that's part of what we're seeing in the United States right now with all the protests. There's mass amounts of people that are just fed up. And I'm thinking to my friends who are just kind of like, eh. And that goes to that sense of entitlement, that sense of privilege that white men just don't have to think very hard to get through life in the United States. And until you're able to kind of think back on that and reflect on that, it's hard to get back. It's hard to get through to them. And so for me, I think the first thing that came to mind was just several friends or I should say people that I thought were friends and some family as well, that were just kind of stopped calling or defriended me on social media spaces, where I was just kind of okay, I'll take that. But, I would grieve, but I would also, just think to myself, when they're ready, they'll come back because they know the path I'm on, the journey I'm on. So.
Yeah. How about you, Mike?
Well, this is one of the things about with I guess native traditional culture. Like I said, one of the things that we were taught, and not everybody follows this, but I'll share this what we were taught growing up is, again, the sacredness of women. And so culturally, like I said, when we say the word sacred, what does that mean? Again, it's something that we hold high above. It's the closest thing to, it's like co-creator. It's the closest thing to creator, our God, that, because she has that connection to give life. And so, again, it comes to a place that when we talk to indigenous people or native people, or even to native people that ain't connected to the culture, we got to remember at some point that was lost. That was lost again because we were forced into a belief system to think something different. Now, that doesn't mean I'm pushing off the responsibility for us to take responsibility or, anything like that, or pointing the finger. Because what I understand today, when we talk about change or when we start to develop change, we start to look at how we have to go back to the beginning. Where did it start, right? It didn't start with me. It was something that I was taught, right? It was something that maybe my father was taught and his father was taught because of colonization, right? So now we get to this place of 2020. And now we're starting to say, okay, well, you know what? We know, because these are movements that haven't been just begun. The women movement has not begun, but You know, the one thing about, again, it's about for us, and I'm speaking for the native culture, is that we understand today, and this is what I teach, is that we can't exist without each other. The women are sacred. They're a sacred being. They're life givers, right? Every time a woman has a child, they bring innocence into the world. Men are sacred. They're sacred because, again, we are the protectors of the women and the children, the elders and things, all things that are around. We have a role as well. We have something to contribute to each other. It's not a me against you thing. You know, that's what I'm understanding today. It's about, again, how can we coexist, love each other, and again, uplift one another, right? How to respect each other's spaces, right? Well, it's hard in today's society. You got job competition. You got everything's a competition. There's, you know, again, like you talk about status quo. There's things that are in place. You got to remember where this is put in place. How, even through education, my education is higher than yours. You know, we start to do that competition. Who's smarter? And that becomes, we forget the basic teachings of love and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. The magic between a man and a woman, and that unity when they create a child, how important that is, right? And to a family that's loving and caring and has, you know, good upbringing, you know. See, so simple things, you know, sometimes when you look at the negativity part, or where, you know, and those have to be acknowledged because they're there, they exist. But 2020, this is where the shift begins. And it's been happening for a long time. You know, with all the conflict in the world, it's pushing us to a position of where we have to make a decision and decide what side we're on. You know, it just has to happen that way. Whether it's, you know, the protests of the, you know, social injustices, or again, is where we're looking at a side saying we're honoring the women. What side are we on? We're on the side over here because I understand how important women are to our communities, right? And so men have to make a decision. Men can't run this world without women. There's just no possible way. There's just no way. You know what I mean? So it's about honoring the women and also offering, you know, again, you know, those simple teachings, not complicated. It's not complicated things, but you know, we have to start getting to a place of understanding that.
Yeah. So for all the men and dads out there who are listening to this, watching this, and, you know, and they're listening to all the obstacles and the difficulties that they could possibly face and probably are facing if they're watching this and trying to take action in their lives. Let's look at on the positive side. What are some of the immediate improvements and or long-term benefits that you have experienced or observed in your parenting when you had successfully gotten a handle on at least some of your sexist beliefs and or behavior? Let's start with Brian.
Sure. I mean, I think some of the best is just the relationship I have with both daughters. And, you know, I was putting my 6-year-old to bed the other night, and it was 2 days ago was her last day of kindergarten. And, you know, I was like, you're gonna wake up tomorrow a first grader. And she's like, no, I'm not, Dad, you know, and kind of like joking with me. And then like we kind of kept talking, and she opened up and kind of shared all this like anxiety she was having and concerns she was having. And, you know, I was there for her. We talked it through. But if I wasn't emotionally invested in her, if I wasn't emotionally invested in myself and demonstrated that I have control of more than just laughter and anger, you know, there'd be a barrier there for her to be her willingness to share with me beyond just like, yeah, I guess so, you know. And so I think for me, I talk to dads all the time about how important it is just to emotionally connect with your kids. And that's not a typical masculine thing or whatnot. But I think a lot of the violence that comes out of men towards other groups, especially towards women, is because they don't have a means to express themselves. They don't understand their role or the relationship. They don't understand the unit and the community, as Mike keeps talking about. And it manifests as anger and violence. And to be able to let go of that and to be vulnerable with yourself and with those around you, I think is the biggest significant benefit that we all get. And the fact that, you know, my wife and I can talk about anything, And when I talk with other dads who are going through divorce or who are like really angry and spiteful, there's just a lack of emotional connection that they have for themselves. And so to be able to work through that with them, it's not going to necessarily heal that relationship or bring them back with the woman or the mother of their child per se, right? But at least it gives them a sense to step back and be like, oh, in this introspective moment, I can kind of start to see where I maybe moved in the wrong direction, or how I can start to heal and return some normalcy to the relationships I have. And I use my daughters as key examples of that with many dads who are working really hard to have a great relationship with their daughter, but it comes with that emotional management, emotional intelligence that a lot of us aren't brought up having.
Evan?
Well, benefits. Well, gosh, I just love watching my daughter just, breaking all the rules. She's a rule breaker. That girl, she's out there.
I'm gonna say we work with Ashton. Ashton's been volunteering with the Pixel Project since she was 16 years old. She is, I'm gonna say now, a shout out to her because she's ultra talented, and she beats most boys at what she does. She's the best. So Evan's on the right track there. So okay, back to Evan.
Yeah. Well, and I can't take any credit for it other than just getting out of the way, and letting her become the person that she's meant to be without all those restrictions and expectations and limitations. And we also have a 24-year-old son who, didn't walk away with all that baggage about, gender roles and privilege, male privilege. He's able to function, I think, in a relationship and in a world where he's not under that weight of those ideas that are just going to get in the way of having healthy relationships and empowering and supporting the women in his life, whether they're people he works with, or whether it's his partner or once he has children. So I think that's the payoff for us. It was a difficult process, but we're really glad that our kids are both now, living in a space where they're not having to deal with all of those pressures and ideas forced on them.
Okay, Mike, what are the improvements and benefits that you found came from the work that you've been doing on yourself?
Well, I think one of the things I didn't mention from the beginning is that, I have 5 children. Like I said, but 2 of them I've been raising since they were babies. My daughter Love was the age of 4 months old, and my son Cisario was 14 months old when I gained custody of him. And so we've been kind of stuck to the hip since the beginning of that. And I think that's when the change began. There's something that happens, and I think those are things that we all have to get to a place of choices. Because even then, when I first had my children, I still thought at that time I could do certain things, like go out with my friends or party or do some things that just things I was used to doing when I was at that age. But at some point, I started realizing that they needed me. They needed me in more than just ways than just being physically there. They needed me in ways that I needed to be. I need to be emotionally connected with my children. I need to be connected with them mentally. I need to be connected with them spiritually as well. And so I could see when they're having hard days. I could see when they're struggling through life, or they're struggling through things, that I'm present, in every way possible. Now through the years, obviously those things have grown into different levels, because at some point, I didn't start off thinking that way. There's times that I sat there and I started doing the work, and I started looking at my own life as I'm helping other people, or helping other men coming out of prison, men coming out of addiction, and sitting with it, talking with them, and sharing with my own story, because that was the inspiration to them. They're like, man, if I could do it, I could do it, you know. And one of my friends, he's actually going to be on the panel too, Albert Titman, I guess in later on in the month. You know, he said this stuff's so much easier to teach. This is what he told me at the beginning of my whole, I guess, my career of doing this. He said this stuff's so much easier to teach when you live what you teach. And so I take that into not just into my work. I take that into like in my life. I'm a teacher to my children. You know, I want to teach them how to be, you know, again, be forgiving and to love and to not judge, not be critical of themselves, not, you know, to let things go and, you know, to be able to be spiritual in a good way, you know what I mean? So that way their spirit is always strong. This work has done so much for me. And I continue to work on myself because the example that I set for the next person is important to me, starting off first with my children. And this is the impact of it. You know, the idea that sometimes that I have the ability to change every man in the world is not possible, you know, but I can start with inside my home. I can do the best that I can do, like each one of us are doing. And hopefully we make positive change. Someone hears something that makes, hey, you know, that's the message I need to hear to keep going, or maybe to look at something different in my life.
Yeah, and listening to three of you is because three of you parented in a different way from your own dads and the other older generation of men in your communities. Your kids are the next generation of kids will hopefully be even better at that when they become parents. And that's where what we're trying to get at, right? Because we're having this panel session because, you know, a lot of it starts with, you know, your parents, your dad, and how they model behavior and how they connect with you, and the gender role and how they help you, teach you how to navigate gender roles, and when to push back and how to push back. And yeah, so let's go on to the $64,000 question here, which is related to the $1 million question, which is related directly to what the Pixel Project does. So let's talk about toxic masculinity, specifically as it manifests as violence, particularly male violence towards women and girls. We see it in many forms everywhere, from domestic violence to rape to killing women who say no to them. This knee-jerk habit of resorting to violence is probably also one of the most difficult forms of toxic masculine behavior to eradicate. So part one of this question: how can men who were never taught to resolve conflict and handle rejection without violence work on themselves in order to avoid further perpetrating this behavior towards women and the girls in their lives, including their daughters? Let's start with Evan.
Boy, you just had to put, that's a tough question. I don't, thankfully, have any personal experience with, you know, physical violence against women. I'm sure it's happened in my community. I'm sure that I've probably lived near or, you know, had folks that I knew that had violence going on in their homes. I don't have any personal experience with you know, anyone who is got that level of toxic masculinity that it's coming out in violence. But I think it all comes down to identity. I think on a core level, men get violent because they believe that, I think falsely, that they should have a level of control within that relationship that they're losing, and I think they get violent to try to gain that control back. And so fundamentally, oftentimes it lies, you know, that they're believing about themselves and about manhood. And I mean, I think if we could just take a step back from, you know, our culture that is constantly kind of barraging us with false narratives about what it is to be a man, you know, not being able to show emotion, being, macho. I'm very small. I'm 5'6". I'm, got earrings. I'm not a real manly man in many, as compared to what American culture might see. A 6 foot, muscular, play sports. Never played sports in my life. Don't even watch sports. So, I've been berated, I've been teased, I've been bullied, I've been, by other men because I don't fit this ideology about what a man is. It's false. If I can't step up and say, look, I'm perfectly comfortable with who I am as a man. I don't need to fit your model in order to feel like I'm valid as a man. I think if each of us as men did that, a lot of that emotion that comes out in the way of violence I don't think would be there, because we would be able to be cool with who we are. We wouldn't feel like we needed to fit that, role. So I mean, that's kind of all I got to say about that.
How about you, Brian? You do a lot of work with some dads who are struggling with this, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I totally appreciate what you said, Evan. And I think what I was thinking of as you were talking was, it's so much of it is performative. Like, again, I'm very lucky that I had a dad who got it and raised me the right way. And, but his generation, there weren't as many, and he behaved the way he did because my grandfather was not the greatest at showing emotion or other things. And he was like, I didn't get that emotional support. I want to show that for my son and my daughter. And it's made all the difference. But so many guys that I see that like puff up their chest, get angry. It's almost like they're just performing the script that they saw on a movie or the cartoon that they saw as a kid. And there isn't a positive role model that they're like, oh, this is the better way, or here's a different way that I could have handled this situation. And so what I do, especially, in the Facebook groups that I run, when I get someone who's really toxic and coming at me, I just try to de-escalate by asking questions and try and like pose questions to them to get them to pause and recognize the language they're using, the violence in the language they're using, but also just to think critically about like, okay, why do you believe like you're saying this about my statement, or you're calling me, like, I agree, Evan. I mean, I played a lot of sports, and I don't have earrings, but I feel like you and I are kindred spirits in how you're responding it. And so I don't look like this huge macho guy, but I'm posing them questions about like, well, why, like, I'm still a guy. So like, what's the disconnect here? And sometimes it works really well. And some of those guys become really actively involved in the community and become great ambassadors for this new way of thinking. And others are just, not ready to hear it yet. But I think it's the posing the questions. It's getting guys to just stop for a minute and reflect on the action that they're about to take and kind of take the wind out of their sails, so to speak.
Yeah. Mike?
Well, like I said, I can only speak for what we see in our communities, in the tribal communities. There's a movement called MMIW, Murder Missing Indigenous Women. It's something that that's been it's been something that's been going on since the beginning of America's of the kidnapping of our women and our children, and for sale, for slavery, for sex, for sex slaves and things of that nature. But again, with the something of that nature, and I don't know if I brought that up because I think what happened is when we talk about colonization and how they part of that the colonization, very bit of people of color, they demasculate men. They took the men out of our communities. They killed them off. So there was really there's those teachings of what a man is have been lost. And this is just the truth. A lot of our communities, it's just there are a lot of women raising men, right? There hasn't been a role model specifically for a community for men to show their children how to be raised. Either they're in prison, they're in debt, or they abandoned at some point. That's just something that we look at our numbers, and then we know that's something probably global. That's something that's normal today. And so one thing that, Brian said is that his father showed him the example. How many men that I've worked with coming out of prison have no father, right? To show them positive teachings. It comes from somewhere, and and it's not like we're trying to figure this out, because again, the colonizers have wrote this stuff down and told them what their plan was by dismantling our families, right? This is normalized, and then we look at our men and go, "What's wrong with you? How come you're doing this?" And you got women, and to say it's not knocking women, but a man needs to raise a man and show them the right way, how to behave, how to speak to women, how to treat women, how to honor themselves, because it was something that it was one of my brothers from he's Paiute, he's from Bishop, California, and I remember he told us a story, and I couldn't mention his name, but I'll mention it. I'll just tell his story. I met him after he got out of prison. I went to his community, his reservation, and he's out of prison for domestic violence, and he's really macho, really tough guy. I'll tell you, his nickname was kind of Scrappy, so because he's like a short guy that kind of just was really defiant at all times, I guess. And but he told me one of the things that he went inside prison, and one of the guys that had a lifer told him, when he told him what he was in there for, he said, "There's no honor in that. There's no honor in hitting a woman." And he goes, "You know what, Mike? This is why I came today, because I never come to these things, these wellness groups or wellness gatherings that are men's groups, but I decided to come because I remember what that guy told me, and I wanted to hear what you had to say." You know what I mean? Because he's right. There's no honor in that. He goes, "I never in my life heard a man tell me that ever." Right? And so it begins with these conversations. It begins with men that people identify with them saying, "Hey, you know what? I believed in that at one time, but I don't believe in that anymore." We need to change this, not only for like ourselves, for our community, right? For the people that are raising. Like I said, I'm a single father, right? And being a father, has taught me so many things. It has, some things that I do with my daughter. When I was growing up, they would call me a lot of names for I guess sissifying, or in their words of like maybe softening myself to maybe play when my daughter was really young, maybe to play with dolls or to sit there and play house or things like that. I had to soften myself because I wasn't raised that way. You know what I mean? So it's about, again, it's something that now that I raise my children, they have a different father here that is teaching that, one of the teachings that as a traditional man, we understand that today, that we understand that I carry not only my father's blood in me, that I carry my mother's blood in me. There's a female component inside me because I'm half woman. I'm part my mom. You know what I mean? That is something that's natural. And so if you see me standing with my hand on my hip, that's my mom coming out in me, right? But it's understanding that, we have both components, that we understand, all of us have a male and female component inside us. And then we have to understand, to get that balance in our lives, to understand, to look at both worlds, to understand how, for me, I guess where I'm at in my life, that I look at it, I look at both worlds and say, well, how can I heal that inside my own family first? You know what I mean? And I think that's something that we look at ourselves, and that's how we could be an example. We start with ourselves, and we understand where someone else comes from when they start to struggle. And when I work with men who come out of prison or an addiction or even abusive domestic violence relationships, those are the kind of conversations I have with them, because we cannot just count out mental illness too. Mental illness runs wild in our communities. And especially if they're using alcohol, they're dual diagnosed. I mean, there's so many different things that they could be, I'm not giving excuses, but they do play a factor in people's thinking and the behavior.
Can I just emphasize something Mike said? I think it's so critical that we have healthy men-only spaces. I think so often, like I was in a fraternity in college, there's a lot of negative crap that went on there, but there was a lot of positive brotherhood that emerged. And when you can have multi-generational spaces of men, like with some of the groups I run on Facebook, you get like men who are actually stepping in and being vulnerable and talking and asking questions that they might feel really embarrassed to say if there was a woman present or someone they just don't know. And so the more that there can be active men's only spaces that we see as a positive influence and not write off as like, oh, that frat, or, you know, these other kind of stereotypes that exist. I think a lot of great health and healing can come out of that. So I really appreciate you speaking to that, Mike.
Yeah, and we've come to the part of the conversation, and after this we'll wrap up, where it's the tips and suggestions part of the conversation. So let's just continue a little bit longer about talking about, you know, male violence, and men resorting to violence, and resolving issues and resolving and in their relationships. And before I ask the question, I'm just going to make an observation that it seems, based on what all three of you are saying, that a lot of this comes out from men not being able to, men not being able to connect with quite a lot, with a whole reservoir of emotions that they do have, and the side that they do have, and they suppress it. And so there's only a very narrow range of reactions and emotions that are prescribed to them, and so that's where the trouble comes from. That's what I'm observing from what three of you are saying in all the different contexts and cultural contexts and all. So with that in mind, how are dads who are still working through this aspect of their programming, because it's always a work in progress, be able to role model for and mentor their sons and other young boys and young men in their communities in a way that breaks the cycle of violence behavior? Brian? Oh no, Mike, go on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brian. Yeah,
No,
I got it. I'll start off. I'll start off, and then you guys can close it out. I would say that, you know, part of that, really part is that, you know, when you make, this is a process. I mean, like I said, having these conversations, having these videos available, having people willing to listen, planting seeds, right? Also, you know, because, you know, I work with different communities here in Northern California, and I have worked with different men and different other facilitators, counselors, and they have groups as that I've helped develop, or I supported, and they develop, and we're coming. We kind of just share this time, and I think there is a small movement happening. Men, I remember started with, like, when I first started out of my addiction. I just got out of jail. I was coming out of my addiction, and this is important. I remember coming out of jail, and I had my children at my mom and dad's house. You know, here I am. You know, I'm Mr. Macho Man. I said, I don't need to be here. I know I ain't a little kid no more. I'm gonna go find somewhere to live. And literally, like, pushing my kids down through the stroller. Like, okay, well, what do I do? I go, you know, went to the welfare office. You know, got on welfare, and, you know, got my little food stamp card, and then, you know, do you have any shelters for men? No shelters for men, but you can try over here. And went to another place, and now you give it to another place, right? And then they said, well, no, we don't give shelters. And they gave me a voucher. They said, well, we got a voucher. We'll give you, and there's a hotel over on Stockton Boulevard. You can stay there. And if you know Sacramento, there's Stockton Boulevard is really where the hostro is at. It's where all the hoes and prostitution and all those things that they call it hostro. So I go. So I'm like, at that point, I don't care where I'm staying at with my kids. And the first night I'm there, I'm like, oh, I can't be here. I'm with my kids. This is not a good place, right? So I leave, and I kind of bite the bullet, and I move back to my mom's. And what I realized is that there's not too many safe places for men to go to get this information, right? There's not a lot of programming. We think these things are available everywhere, and they're not, right? And with my children, you know, and we start to develop it. You know, when I started, you know, this is why I started Native Dads Network, because I wanted to give back what helped. I mean, I know there's nothing out there, so I wanted to give something back to the community that I lived in. You know what I mean? That I know there's nothing out there, especially for Indigenous men. There's something for them to have a safe place to come and learn from other men, to mentor, because it's like we've been taught. There's not a book for parenting. There's not a book to being a father. Well, we are developing one. We are developing and saying, okay, well, now there is. There is rules, there's principles to being a father. There is honor to being a father. It is important to be present. There are things that when you work with your kids, that they're going to remember you. They're going to remember everything you do, whether you're there or not. You know what I mean? And so it's about developing those things, giving the things back, understanding that our children need us. And it's really super important that they know that you love them. They see what love means. When you say you love your kids, then be there for them. Show them the right way. Teach them how to honor themselves, respect themselves, right? And I know it's hard, especially when we've been conditioned. And this we got to remember, we're conditioned one way as men. And it's about changing those things and not being afraid. And this is what sometimes fear comes in, being afraid, being the singular voice going, no, that's not okay. That's not okay for you to do that. And that you're going to get some static. You're going to get men that are going to go, who do you think you are telling us not to be this way? Or who do you think you are for doing this? But you have to have the courage to stand up and say, enough's enough. This is not okay anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Evan?
Well, I think my advice would be for men out there that, I think by and large, the Christian church is, at least here in America, as I know it, is rejected a lot of those patriarchal ideologies. I think there's hundreds of denominations because there's hundreds of different ideas and ways that churches want to function. And I think there are some denominations, there are some churches yet that maybe more like the church I grew up in that are highly patriarchal. And I think for men that are in those communities, I think first thing you do is listen to the women in your life. Early in my marriage, my wife told me, look, this isn't right. These things aren't really right. And I didn't have the strength at the time to resist the groupthink and to fight back against these, my elders to go and cause waves, to be told you're not living biblically according to our beliefs, and you need, there's something wrong with you, because all of us agree this is fine. I didn't have the strength to push back and actually stand up for my wife. And I think for any men that are in those kinds of communities where you're seeing those signs that there are gender roles or expectations about roles of men and women, there are patriarchal ideas, I think the first thing to do is to be strong enough to just say, this isn't right, and to be able to push back and represent, defend your wives, your daughters. There's communities out there where there are great resources that can equip, I think, folks who don't feel like the way those scriptures are translated are representing the faith experience that they want to live. One that comes to mind is the Junia Project, JUNIA project.com. It's a great community of men and women who are advocating for the inclusion of women in leadership in the church. It's also for mutuality in marriage, and they've got a lot of great resources on there. So I'd say just, find a community of people that you can learn from, can equip yourself with the tools you need to kind of push back, advocate for equality within your community, and you can actually bring about change that will benefit everybody.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, I think, both great wisdom shared there. On the simplest level, I think it's just doing a gut check every time you think to say something about a woman's body, their image. Are they pretty? Are they nice looking? Like, just a simple act of reflecting on the language you use is so critical to changing that behavior. In the Catholic tradition, Jesuit tradition that I'm most connected to spiritually, and in the work I've done in Jesuit higher education, there's a 15-minute prayer that St. Ignatius would do called the Examen, where you reflect on your day every day at the end, and just like the good, the bad, the ugly, everything about your day, and look for those trends of where you really excelled and did the work that you're supposed to do, and where you didn't, where you were a sinful person in the Catholic language. And I think that could so well map onto this of at the end of your day, just reflect back, where did you have language that was not helpful, that could be construed as violent? What were the actions that you had? And how can then at the end of that reflection, how can you change it the next day? How can you like pause before taking a negative step in that direction?
Okay, so we're pretty much going to wrap up soon. So I'm going to ask the final question because y'all actually answered quite a lot of the other questions. Do you have to address all the dads and dads to be out there who are still resisting the idea of self-improvement, and who, even though they are aware that they need to do the inner work and they're finding it difficult in some way, whether it's getting motivated or taking action or even sort of thinking about the idea itself, these ideas that three of you have been talking about. Do you have any particular tips and suggestions for them to help them start taking the first step? Evan.
I mean, I would say the most effective thing that I've always done as a man and a father in regards to self-examination, and I think, you know, recognizing the need that I need to change and being willing to do the work to change starts with recognizing that there's a problem. And I think the most effective thing I've always done is from the time my daughter was born, I asked myself, you know, who's the man I want her to marry? How do I want her treated? What is the life I want her to live? I mean, if she even chooses to get married, which at this point in time, she's determined that she never will, which is great. But even if it was just the men in her life around her, a boss, how would I want her treated? By would I want her prospects in her career affected by a sexist boss? Would I want, say, the man she married or any other men in her life? And if, you know, if I see anything in myself that I wouldn't want in the men in her life, in her future, then there's a problem, you know, and that's a good starting point. Because it's interesting when you identify someone that you know, that you deeply care about and you want the best for them, like I think any father wants for their own daughter, it's amazing how that changes your perspective. And I ask the same about my son is, you know, is what you know, what is, how do I want him to function in relation to the women in his life, similarly to the way I would want, you know, the men in my daughter's life to treat her? Is he treating other women in his life the way I would want men in my daughter's life to treat her? Empower, you know, respect, all of those things. And if I'm seeing anything that's a little bit of a red flag, then that's a great starting point. Just, you know, one small thing.
Okay, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, especially amongst the fathers I work with, it's find another dad, find another man to kind of hold you accountable. Whether that's one-on-one, like a mentorship relationship, or like a group of guys that, you know, like an accountability group or accountability circle where you can go and feel vulnerable enough to ask, like, hey, I did this, is this right or wrong? Because I think, you know, without really being explicit, like, you know, a lot of the men I work with, we like hard examples to be like, this is what I did right here, this is what I did wrong, like, teach me, show me what I did wrong so I can correct it. If like the first step would just be finding a group that you feel comfortable to do that with, and if you don't have a group, like, reach out to any of us. I'm sure we could help you find a group. You know, there's plenty of groups out there that I think want a sea change to happen for men and for fathers, and so it's just taking those steps and finding that group.
Okay, so Mike, you have the last word today.
Oh, yes. I would say I'm just saying, open your heart. And you know, there's every community that I've been to, and I've been to a lot of communities throughout the country. Each community, there are fathers in communities that are not only you know, not sort of putting themselves out there, I'm a great dad, or I'm doing mentorship or anything, but there are good men in every community. Not every community is toxic. And so if something that you want to change, you know, I mean, you have to be around, you have to find somebody that's going to like mentor you, like you said. And sometimes it's always about little changes. You know what I mean? It always, like I always tell the guys, you know, it starts with their thoughts. You know, it really just starts with your thoughts. How do you think? You know what I mean? And so when you start to change your, like, this is all the cognitive thinking. Like you change your thoughts, you change your behavior. You know, and so when we start to have children, or we start to say, you know, this is not something that, you know, that you don't feel right when I act this way. You know, learn to be open-minded to be teachable. You know, that's the beginning. Willing to take advice, willing to open up and say, you know what, how did you do that? Or I see how you changed, or I see how you raise your kids, or I see how you talk to your wife. Where'd you learn that from? And just be open-minded to hear something different from somebody else. A lot of time, men, it's our ego. It's strictly our ego gets in the way of, like, say, asking or confronting, going to another man and asking for help. You know what I mean? Because again, the macho thing, like, I could do this on my own, my life's okay. And really, sometimes our men are broken. A lot of times our men are just broken, and they're just lashing out because of whatever reasons. And I'm not justifying their behavior, but what I'm saying is that, you know, a lot of times it's putting our ego down, saying, you know what, I could use some advice. I could learn something from this individual. I could go to this group. I could go to this meeting. I could do something for myself to improve myself. You know what I mean? Because it's beneficial not only to myself, it's beneficial to my children, right? It's beneficial to my grandchildren. It's beneficial to, and I hate the expression, "I can't teach an old dog new tricks." I don't believe that. That's just pure a cop-out. You know, that's why I tell men all the time, don't not ever say that to me. That's just the way you are. That's what you're choosing to be. You know, any kind of change takes work. Don't be lazy. Get up, go do what you got to do to make that change for yourself.
Okay, so before we go to a slide that we put together with some resources for dads and communities that are watching this, we have a comment from Anusha addressed to Mike. She says, it's so great to hear Mike's perspective, especially on the long-term effects of colonization that people don't always think or talk about.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So
Awesome.
now we're gonna share. Before we wrap up, we put together a little slide with a few resources that folks can use. So let's see. Screen share. Okay. Share screen. Can you all see this?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So for everyone out there who's watching this, whether you're watching it live or watching it after we recorded it, you can learn more about the Pixel Project and Violence Against Women. We are like a 101. Our entire website is like a 101 on violence against women. If you don't know what it is and you want to learn more, you go to www.pixelproject.net. To learn more about this program that this live stream panel session is under, to learn about Fathers for Pixels, you go to bit.ly/dads for pixels. This is case sensitive. If you want to learn more about Men Challenging, who is one of the collaborators for this program, you go to www.menchallenging.org. And to learn more about Fathering Together of Brian Anderson, who's one of today's guests, he is the co-founder of this organization. And you go to www.fatheringtogether.org, get in touch with them, and Brian will help you get into one of the communities that he runs. So we're going to stop sharing now. Before we go, do any of you have any announcements coming up for your organizations, for dads?
I'll just throw out there, we actually, from our Facebook groups, we've collected 20 stories. So we have our first published book of dad stories, we're calling Fathering Stories. So we're doing that as part of our build up to Father's Day with some events and activities we have tied to that. So, you know, they're raw, they're real, and they cover a gamut of issues that we've covered today too. So check it out on our website. Yeah.
Mike, do you have any resources or any upcoming online events you want to share from the Native Dads Network?
Yeah, we're just basically right now, what we're doing right now on we have a few pages. Oh, I do. Like obviously our Native Dads Network page it's on Facebook, but we're also on Facebook. Fatherhood is Sacred, Sacramento chapter, and weekly every Thursday Pacific time. It's 5:00 p.m. It's only an hour session. I do Facebook Live. I do actually do a fatherhood class, and so all you gotta do is go to our page, like it, and you'll tune in every Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, and you can be part of that group.
Okay, and Evan, shout out for It's a Girl.
Oh yeah, sure. I guess if you want to see the film I made on gender side, you can go to itsagirlmovie.com or type in It's a Girl documentary. It's on Amazon Prime, Google, various ways you can see it.
Yeah, and it's eye-opening, totally eye-opening. Now, we will thank everybody who's watching today and everybody who's going to be watching this after this gets recorded. Have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world. And remember, change, like Mike, Evan, and Brian said, change is hard, but you get there are a lot of good things that will come from change. You just got to work at it. And for all the men out there who like Mike talked about ego, don't be afraid. We're not going to laugh at you. People who do have lessons to learn, and just do the work. A lot of good things will come out from it. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good evening.
Good night.